Todd Cherches, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Steve, thanks for having me.
I was really looking forward to this conversation because the folks that listen to this podcast, they're business leaders, they're entrepreneurs, they're folks that are researching and looking to improve. And I think the biggest challenge that everyone faces as a parent, as a coach, a teacher, a leader of an organization, a boss, is that getting what's in your head put into a consumable way that makes sense to everyone you're trying to communicate to. And guess what? You have a book about.
That's exactly what it's about. And my mantra is, how do you get people to see what you're saying? It's all about visual thinking, visual communication, and visual leadership.
Yeah, so I love this. Visual Leadership is the name of your book, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking and Leadership in Life. And I was like, really, this is really right up my alley. I watched your TED Talk. You have a TED Talk as well.
Yeah.
People need to go listen to. But what in the world inspired you to start sharing this passion with folks and helping folks be better leaders by using visual powers?
Yeah, I'm a very visual person, as many of us are. In fact, we're all wired visually. Like some people say, oh, I'm more of an auditory person or I'm more of a kinesthetic person. But the brain science shows that we're all wired visually. Like if you hear a noise, what do? You turn and you look to see what that noise is, the rustling in the bush or whatever, right? So it's kind of like that's just the way our brains are wired visually. And getting people to see what we're saying is one of the hardest challenges we all face in business and in life, right? How do you get people are not mind readers, right? So when someone says to you, "Oh, that's not what I meant," or "You should have known," or you know what? It's one of my stories I tell in my book. I call it ice, rice, or mice. So I was in a restaurant and I asked for some more ice for my soda, and I ended up with a bowl of rice. So I said ice, they brought me rice. So the question is, whose fault was that? Was it? It could be my New York accent. I know I talk really fast, but but if I had held up my glass and pointed to my glass and said, "Can I have some more ice?" He probably would not have put rice in that glass, right? So, but people hear what they think they want to hear, need to hear, what they thought they heard. But our job, I always say the burden of communication is on the communicator, and that's something that as a marketing person, that it's about how do you get your messaging across to our audiences.
Yeah, imagine that one day you're asked to take a new concept to a new country that you don't speak the language to. And you show up there and you realize you have to lead a team all of a sudden, but you guys don't speak the same language. What in the world would you do?
Well, I faced that exact situation. I talk about it very briefly in my TED Talk. And so basically, long story short, I was 30 years old. I was hired as a theme park production company out in LA to oversee a project. And they said, oh, by the way, you need to go over to China to oversee the installation. And I was like, wait, what? It's like, first of all, I had an extreme fear of flying. I didn't even have a passport. I had never been out of the United States before. I'm 30 years old. I was hired as a project coordinator, and now they're shipping me across to China to oversee this installation of these life-size robotic animal figures for a cultural theme park in Shenzhen, China, just over the border from Hong Kong. So they picture life-size elephants, sheep, and cows, robotic. So the trunks go up, spray water, and make that elephant sound. So we had to pack them up. We had to have them engineered and designed and built in LA, put them on a shipping container across the Pacific Ocean. It took like a month to get there. Got there, got on the site, and I'm there. First of all, I'm there. It was 110 degrees with 100% humidity, and I'm wearing a business suit, like, because I'm the project manager. So what do I know? I'm 30 years old. I show up in my double-breasted business suit, and I'm just sweating through this suit. And everyone else is wearing shorts and t-shirts. And I figure I have to meet the clients. I have to look really professional. The client executives, they didn't even show up. They were going to come to the grand opening, but so anyway, so I show up there, and it was me and two guys on my staff, a mechanical guy, an engineering guy, and the Chinese counterparts, but they didn't speak English and we didn't speak Chinese. So we're literally standing there staring at each other. They gave us a translator who spoke no English, right? So I don't know how helpful that was. So he knew a few words, but not enough. So what happened was we needed to get stuff installed. So we needed tools and things like that. So what did I do? I said, if I can't communicate with words, maybe pictures. So I started picking up, and I know for the people listening to the podcast, you won't see this, but if you're watching the video, this is the drawing of sketches that I did. So if we needed a hammer, a screwdriver, a tape measure, I literally had to draw it. So that's not so bad, right? For someone who can't draw that well, right?
Yeah.
So I draw a picture and point to it, and they'd go get the hammer or the screwdriver. So then it hit me later on. It's like, hey, this is almost like playing Pictionary or charades, like with your family or your friends, right? It's like 2 words, sounds like screwdriver, right? So it's kind of like we're using hand motions and trying to. So it hit me that, hey, we communicate not with body language, facial expressions, and a smile is universal, right? A smile translates into any language. So um, my background is working in the TV industry and the theme park business. So a lot of my mindset is around storytelling and character development and beginnings, middles, and ends. So that's informed my approach to management, leadership, training, and coaching is my visual leadership approach, which is all about again creating pictures and mental movies in other people's minds so that they could see what we're saying.
Yeah, so it's such a challenge. And I talk about it a little bit in my book, but it really struck me that there was a time not long ago where silent motion pictures were the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, you could put anybody from any culture, any age, any language and sit them down in front of a silent movie, and we would giggle at the same things. We would tear up about the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so amazing that we have this universal language. One of them is math, and one of them is visual or eyes.
Yeah, yeah. And think about 2 of the words you just used, motion pictures and movies, right?
Mm.
Movies, if you think about it, movies look like they're moving. That's why we call them moving pictures, right? They are
Mhm.
pictures that move at 60 frames a second. So these are all still frames, but they go by so fast that they create the illusion in our mind's eye of movement, right? So if you're watching a silent movie or really any movie, it's still pictures. So again, the power of visual thinking is our mind creates this it puts the pieces together mentally, but those are still frames going by. We don't even think about that, right? But that's why we call them movies. They're moving pictures, literally.
Wow. So you think about people say we're in the attention economy, but I disagree. We're in the focus economy, meaning that I can drop a book on a floor and everybody will stop talking and look, but then they go right back to what they were doing. And I got their attention, but I lost it just as fast as I got it.
Yeah.
But it's important that you learn to take the opportunity to get their focus, and we're competing against highly weaponized platforms that are designed to grab our attention and then pull our focus in for hours, and we look up and we go, oh my gosh, I've been on Instagram for an hour and a half now.
Yeah.
But yet as leaders, that's what we're competing against, as parents, as business owners.
Yeah.
And so by taking the concepts in your book, the concepts that you teach about at Columbia University and NYU, it's important to put this in here because that's what you're up against.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk about why visuals, but people say, why visuals? What is it about visuals that make it so impactful? And without getting into all the neuroscience of the brain, I use 3 words: attention, comprehension, and retention, right? So when you use a visual image or visual language, right? We paint pictures with words as well, right? Where people can create an image in their mind's eye. When you use a visual image or visual language, it gets people's attention and it gets them to focus, just like you're saying, right? It's like, it's not just the attention, but the focus on that thing. Comprehension, it increases understanding, because when you're looking at something, like if I explain, how to get to my apartment in Manhattan from JFK Airport, I could describe it to you verbally, but isn't it better if I just send you a map and you look at it and say, oh, now I see where your apartment is relative to the airport. I have to go, this direction and this direction, right? So it's attention is first, comprehension is second, and retention is third. When we see a visual image, it's stuck in our mind's eye. And as I was preparing for our talk today, I was thinking about, I know you're in Amarillo, right? That's where you're
Yes.
located. So
Yes.
I was flashing back, and the other day I was listening to a Bruce Springsteen mix on Spotify, and the song Cadillac Ranch came on. And so are you not far from there, I'm guessing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when I lived in LA for 10 years, grew up in New York, lived in LA for 10 years when I worked in the entertainment industry for Disney and CBS, a number of other countries. But when I moved back to New York, my brother flew out from New York to LA. We jumped in my car and we drove cross country. So we took Route 66 and
Mhm.
stopped off in all little small towns along Route 66. And one of our stops was at Cadillac Ranch, right?
Yeah.
So every time I hear the Bruce Springsteen song, what do I think of? it comes rushing back. Those cars, those colorful cars with the spray paint headfirst in the ground. And my brother and I spray painted our names on them and took pictures. So that one song by Bruce Springsteen, who's from New Jersey, by the way, right near me in New York, but that
Yeah.
song Cadillac Ranch takes me back to another place and time in my head where I'm almost watching a video in my head, a mental home movie of being at the Cadillac Ranch and what that was like, what it looked like, what it felt like. And that's the power of visual thinking, right? We hear something auditorially as in a song, but it takes us back to a visual memory in our mind. So that's like just one example of the power, and it connects us because, again, the New York Amarillo connection right there.
Absolutely. And it also takes you to an emotion. You remember an emotion
Yeah.
from there, and that's why it sticks and resonates.
Exactly.
And that helps you compete against all the other messages that are trying to get in at the time.
Yeah, the poet William Wordsworth, I majored in English literature as an undergrad. So the poet William Wordsworth had an expression called the poetry is the recollection of powerful feelings, and he called it emotion recollected in tranquility. So you hit it right on the head. Marketing is not just facts, it's emotions, facts and feelings, right? So
Mhm.
when you take someone back, like Marcel Proust, he had that Madeleine, that cookie that when he tasted it just brought him back to his childhood.
Yeah.
So sights and sounds and songs and imagery basically takes us on a mental journey and recreates those mental movies in our mind's eye. And again, like, that's the power of visual thinking. So whether we have a dream and remember it, whether we're picturing what our day is going to look like or envisioning our future, those are all examples of using visual thinking to basically process information and make decisions.
I talk about we live in a world that's industrialized in many ways, including our communication. And everybody defaults to a text first communication assumption. And you think about all the energy it takes your brain to read an email. We'll read a short one, but we won't read a long one.
Yeah.
And the beauty of what you're talking about is a shortcut around all these hurdles that our industrialized society has put in front of our brain 1.0. We have these phones that are like 12 point iPhone 12 point whatever, but our brains are still 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we need to be smart and adapt our communication to accommodate our brains rather than what we're been industrialized to project.
Yeah, I mean, that's why a picture is worth 1,000 words is one of those expressions in every single language. If you think about it, cave drawings, which were, we've seen cave drawings going back to 45,000 BC, or 45,000 years ago. So cave drawings existed long before the written language, right? Long before math, long before the Egyptian hieroglyphics. If you think about Egyptian hieroglyphics, they're basically pictograms, right? So they basically pictures evolved or morphed into letters, right? So we're just, again, that's just another example of how, and now we use emojis, right? So our
Yeah.
emojis of today are the cave drawings of 45,000 years ago.
Nothing's new.
Yeah.
So, great communicators. This is how big of a competitive advantage this is because great communicators, the people that we follow, think about it, the thought leaders you follow, the books that you read that you really appreciate, you get something from, and they help you see something more clearly that was a little bit fuzzy before, is they've really succinctly packaged what was in their head and presented it to you, and you go, oh,
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But so you use acronyms a lot of times. You help us see these pictures, and for whatever reason, it endears us to you.
Yeah, one of the things I was actually in a meeting. I belong to this thought leaders group of authors and speakers, and we were talking about that yesterday. How do we get our thought leader? If you think about the word thought leadership, right? It's the thought and it's the leadership, right? So it's part one is formulating ideas in your head, and the leadership side is getting it out there into the world and getting other people on board with those thoughts, right, and those ideas. And that's one of the biggest challenges we face, especially when we're communicating something that's never seen before. So when we use visual language and metaphors, and for example, golden toilet, we could talk about as a powerful visual metaphor, right? They make the unfamiliar familiar, the intangible tangible, and the abstract concrete, and the invisible visible, right? So if we use visual language, people will say, if you say, oh, this is kind of like that, people have to know what that is, and you're making the connection, right? So one of the stories in my book I tell is about the creation of Southwest Airlines on a napkin sketch, right? Where they were sitting at a bar, and one said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was an airline that just connected Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, and they drew a triangle, and it's like, wow, that would be amazing, right? And Southwest Airline was born from that napkin sketch, right? So that's the legendary story. So again, in order for that idea to resonate, that person had to have a mental image of a map of Texas and see that triangle. So you could actually describe it as I'm doing right now, right? I didn't draw it, right? I'm not using it, but I'm sure you're picturing it in your mind's eye, because you could picture a triangle, you could picture those three cities and a map of Texas. It's like, wow, that's how Southwest Airlines was born, right? So think about how often our messages are lost in translation because we can't communicate them effectively so that the other person can really get it and see it.
You're listening to Todd Cherches, or maybe you're watching. We're honored to have Todd Cherches on our show today. TEDx speaker. He's an executive coach, CEO of BigBlueGumball. He's also the author of Visual Leadership, leveraging the power of visual thinking and leadership in life. Todd, as humans, we have these eyes that are on the front of our heads. They're tell us, what's the word I'm wanting to come up with? Anyway, our eyes are on the front, and so they're looking forward, but our brains are so big because we have a unique optical, our brains are designed to help us see almost the best in all the animal kingdom. And so therefore we're very centric about seeing. And that's why we say, I see what you're saying. Oh, I get it. And that's why we're so centric on this visual thing.
Yeah, people say I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. In fact, in my book, I have a whole bunch of, I go down like with common, out of sight, out of mind, right? Thoreau said it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. Napoleon said a good sketch is better than a long speech. Every picture tells a story. So the list goes on, right? Picture this. Disney, if you could dream it, you could do it. If you can see it, you can be it, right? So there's a whole list. So it's like, that's the focus, to use that word, of my work, is using visual seeing as a metaphor. So it's looking, it's seeing, it's noticing, it's watching, and basically taking in information visually. One of the things someone asked me the other day is like, how does this apply to people who may be blind or sight impaired? We could still use visual language. Like, so if I was describing the Southwest Airlines triangle before, even if you couldn't physically see with your physical eye, you could still see it in your mind's eye. And Shakespeare actually coined the term to see something in your mind's eye. In Hamlet, when Hamlet said, I think I see my father, and Horatio says, where? Hamlet says, in my mind's eye, because he wasn't sure if he saw an actual ghost or if it was a figment of his imagination. So when he said it's in my mind's eye, think about that. We don't have an eye in our mind, but when we picture something and we're not sure if we're seeing it physically, that's the metaphor we use. So, and Shakespeare was the one who popularized that phrase. So it's just so ingrained in our culture, but this really does apply to everyone in all contexts, in work and in life.
Yeah, binoculars was the word I was trying to think of there.
Yeah.
So when you're leading people, you need to help them see where you're going in the future, in the horizon. And so you literally have to draw a picture with words, with images, but they need to be complementary. And here's the thing that I think is broken about marketing is that we focus on the words, but we don't realize how the visual can be so powerfully complementary and empowering to communicate way more than a stupid sentence.
Yeah, I mean, again, as we mentioned before, attention spans are so much shorter these days, right? There's so much clutter. As marketers, we need to cut through the clutter. Also, think about different mediums we use. Like if you're driving, like picture a billboard, right? A billboard, like a good PowerPoint slide, is meant to convey an idea in an instant, right? In the blink of, if you're driving 80 miles an hour down the highway, you're not going to pull over and stop to read a whole page of text, right? You might do that in a magazine, or online, but you're not going to do that on a billboard. Similarly, with your PowerPoint slides, I'm sure we've all seen those death by bullet point PowerPoint slides where people just put up paragraphs and then they start reading one bullet after another. And what happens is, while you're talking, you're presenting, people can read so much faster than you could talk. Maybe not as faster than I could talk, because I talk pretty fast. But while you're presenting to them, what are they doing? They're reading ahead. So they're on to your like 8th bullet point while you're still on number 3, right? So we need to use our visuals to combine with our words to get our message across. So there's two principles that I often talk about. One is the picture superiority effect, which is a scientific principle that says that if pictures and text are doing battle against each other, the picture will always win. And one example of that, again, for the people watching this on the video, this is the book list for my NYU course. This is the same list, right? So it's the same information, but where is your eye drawn? In terms of attention, comprehension, and retention, which one is going to get you, your eyes are magnetically drawn to the visual image. So that's the power of, that's the picture superiority effect in action. And the other theory is called dual coding theory, and dual as in two, is that when you use pictures combined with text, that's more powerful than either text or images alone, right? So for example, would you buy something on Amazon or eBay if there was not a picture of the item, just from the description? Probably not. If someone sends you a LinkedIn invitation and there's no headshot and you don't know who that person is, are you going to accept it? Maybe not, right? So if you have a blog post, if it has a visual image attached to it, you're more likely to read it than if it doesn't. So those are all just three practical real world examples of how visuals just get our attention and hook us in, right? So again, they have to be appropriate visuals, they have to be relevant and relevant to your audience as well. But just again, more examples of how visuals help to get our message across.
As a salesperson, I really struggled with communicating concepts, because what we do as an agency is very conceptual. We're moving people from the physical world that you innately get, how to set up a shop and make it accommodating and a good user experience. But to translate that into a virtual world is very difficult. Okay. And so you've heard that saying, like, you got to tell people something 7 times before they hear it. And so my struggle was, as a salesperson, how do you tell someone 7 times when you only get to talk maybe 10 minutes in an hour-long conversation? And that's when it hit me to create a visual of a perspective of how to look at a website. And that's where the toilet metaphor came from. And when I would say to you, Todd, your website's just a toilet, then you can
I won't take that personally. I'm not going to, I spent a lot of money, and my designer, Nancy Siegel, I don't think she would love to hear that, but I'll let you keep going on that.
But there's some insecurity that goes with you going, well, I hope it's not, right? And so, but when I would say that, you could literally hear their brains skidding, the little tires on their brains skidding on them. What did you just say? And it's like, look, you wouldn't move into an office if it didn't have one. You wouldn't build a house if it didn't have one. When people come over, where do you hang out? You hang out in the kitchen, you hang out on the patio, by the pool, by the fireplace. But it's just a very important piece of a bigger system that helps you grow the value of your business. And so that's where that book image comes from. What's absurdly, universally iconic example of wasted money? It's a golden toilet.
Yeah. It's a great metaphor. It's visual. It is memorable. It's sometimes with visuals, we want to be a little shocking or use some humor, right? So one of the things I talk about in my book, I break it down to 4 categories, and we could tie this back to the golden toilet metaphor, is there's 4 different ways to think and communicate visually. Category 1 is using imagery and or drawing, right? So use a picture. It could be a PowerPoint slide. It could be a physical demonstration of something. It's like, here, let me show you this, right? So your golden toilet would be an example of a visual image, but you could also do a workshop and have people draw one. Pick up a pen and draw a toilet. Now color it in gold or whatever, right? So that's category 1. Category 2 is using mental models and frameworks, right? So a mind map, a storyboard, a process diagram, anything where you're basically framing out a schematic of any kind, right? Those are all frameworks and models. That's category 2. Category 3 is using metaphors and analogies, and that's again the golden toilet. You're using it as an analogy for flushing your money down the drain. You're spending all this money, but is it going to quote waste, right? And category 4 is using storytelling and with bonus points for humor, right? So again, the golden toilet has some humor in it as well, right? So you're using basically all of these, right? You have a visual image, you have a model or framework you use to get people to understand your process, you're using a great metaphor, and you use a lot of storytelling, as you just did. You told me a story about how your website could be a toilet because you may be flushing your money down the drain. So it's not any one of those things, but when you use any combination of those 4 things, that's where it becomes really powerful. So golden toilet's a great example of that.
Well, thank you. So what does one learn when they attend your executive coaching courses?
Sure. Well, my executive coaching tends to be one-on-one, and then my training programs basically are in groups. And as in my NYU and Columbia classes, they basically learn to use the skills. So I just talked about those 4 categories. What I teach people is how to use those 4 categories more effectively. So a real life example, I just had my first article published in Inc. magazine 2 months ago, and I just had my second one published 2 days ago. So my first one was called "Can You Draw What Your Company Does?" And it's based on exercise I do with my clients, where I had one of my clients was a pharmaceutical company where the business development salespeople who are out in the field, they were always using different stories and metaphors to explain what they did, what their products were, how they were better than the competition. So what we did is we brought all the salespeople together, around 20 people, and then we had them on a flip chart. We gave them colored markers, and I always have my colored markers with me and flip charts. So they had to pick up a pen. They had 5 minutes to draw out a visual image that represented how they explained to their potential clients what they do and how they did it. Then they had 5 minutes to present it. In the course of doing it, we found that everyone was using different stories, different metaphors, and many of them were not only inaccurate, but really wrong. So
Yeah.
one example I tell in that Inc. article, and again, it's called "Can You Draw What Your Company Does?" One guy said, "Oh, our company is like a whale and our competitors are like goldfish and we eat them alive." And then the CEO and then the VP said, "No, not really. It's more like our competitors, because we're not bigger than them and there's not more of them than us. So the whale versus goldfish didn't work." He said, "What if we say our competitors are sharks because they're cutthroat and they just care about closing the deal and then swimming off after they bit your leg off, right? We are like dolphins. We are warm, friendly, smart, cuddly, empathetic, caring, compassionate." So then they agreed on, yeah. So that's our metaphor now. So we are dolphins, our competitors are sharks, and boom, that's the story to tell our customers. So we spent like 10, 15 minutes just debating what kind of fish or aquatic mammal they were. So it became fun and kind of goofy. But the point was, when we walked out of that meeting saying we are dolphins, and it became like a mascot for them and a metaphor, then they said, is this a dolphin-like thing to do or to say, right? When our customers come to us, remember, we're not the cutthroat shark like our competitors. We're the cuddly, friendly, caring dolphin. And just that one example I tell in that article, right there, it illustrates the power of drawing, storytelling, metaphor, and ends up creating a framework for how they were going to go about doing this in their sales process. So that's just one off the top of my head, real life example of how we could use this to be more effective. And I have many more. So.
I can imagine some of the folks that show up to these courses maybe not so jacked up about attending. Like, I can't color. I'm embarrassed of my drawings. But after they leave, I bet you see a big transformation.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the article. A lot of people suffer from what I call ICD, which is I can't draw syndrome, right? So, but if you ask the question, you ask the question of people, kindergarten kids, right? How many of you could draw? Who raises their hands? Every one of them, right? You ask business people who here could draw, you get a few. I'm not really sure. So when we talk about drawing in this context, it's not about a test of your artistic ability. It's a test of your ability to convey your abstract concepts, like you were just talking about, into an image that you could use to communicate as a metaphor what it is that you do. So people could say, oh, okay, now I get I'm sure everyone here, again, you're not seeing the picture that was drawn, but I'm sure you could picture a dolphin and a shark and say, now I get why we're more dolphin-like than shark-like, like our competitors. So that's the thing. We need to get over that I can't draw, but we don't have to always draw. We could use images. We could use, here are a couple of things I keep on my desk here. When I'm talking about always being curious, I have my Curious George doll, right? So
Yeah.
I keep this on my desk. If I talk about being flexible, I have my Gumby, right?
Yeah.
So here I didn't need to draw anything, but I'm using a visual image that we're all familiar with. Again, even if you're listening to the podcast, you could picture Curious George in your head, you could picture Gumby in your head, and you know that what kind of traits each of those characters symbolizes. So again, another example of using visual thinking to get an idea across.
Yeah, there's a great book, Conversations That Win the Complex Sale, that really
Mm-hmm.
helped me see that using handwriting, your brain is naturally attracted to that as opposed to fonts or text.
Yeah. I mean, it's called VARC, visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. So those are 4 basically learning and communication modalities. So when you use all of those, kinesthetic, like you're talking, when you're drawing, it actually activates another part of your brain, right? So that's what we're trying to do, just like with the dual coding theory, where you're activating both the left brain and the right brain. When you're drawing, you're using pictures, you're not just using the text and numbers part of your brain, you're using the creative visual part of your brain. And again, getting your ideas across more effectively.
I think one of the things that your program can really help with is, as a person who's wanting to improve or really transform themselves, you have to draw a picture of what you want to be in the future to head that way. What's some of the concepts that you have in your book or your teaching that helps us accomplish that?
Yeah, well, one of the images and metaphors I use in my TED Talk, and I also talk about in my book and in my classes, is that of the leadership journey. So I have a picture of, so picture this: you're inside the car, looking out, right? If you look forward through the front windshield and the road ahead, picture yourself on an open road with no other cars around, and it's blue skies up ahead. That's the future, right? So the windshield, the road, and the blue sky, that represents the future. Now you can only see as far as the horizon, and similarly, you don't know what's over the horizon, the weather, the obstacles ahead, the detours, whatever. So we can only visualize as far as the eye can see, but as leaders, we need to think what's beyond that, right? So we need to strategize and plan. The rear view mirror represents the past, how we got here, where we came from, our successes and our failure stories. But it also reminds us, because it's a mirror, to pull over and look in the mirror and reflect on ourselves, look internally. We may be tired, we may be exhausted, we may be hungry, but we need to look in the mirror to say, re-examine who we are and how we are as leaders in an introspective way. And our dashboard represents the metrics, right? How do you measure success? So just like in a car, it tells us how fast we're going or how many miles there are in the car. How do you measure success in your business, right? How do you measure the ROI? How do you measure costs and expenditures and revenues and all those kinds of things? Those are the three of the concepts. Then when you're in the car, you think about, all right, when am I in the driver's seat with my foot on the pedal, my hands on the wheel? When do I move over to the passenger seat, let someone else lead, let someone else drive, where I'm navigating? When do I sit in the back seat and let someone else navigate and drive, but I'm there for support if needed? So as a leader, you want to think about, where are you sitting in that car? Sometimes you do have to say, let me drive, let me take over. Other times it's like, I'm here if you need me in the back seat, I'm going to take a nap, right? So just right there, that's the metaphor of the leadership journey. And each of us is on our own individual leadership journey, but as a team or an organization, you're on this journey together. So that's one of the things: how are we going to get from point A to point B effectively as a unit? So again, that's just one metaphor I often use to think about past, present, and future. So again, rear view mirror is the past, the dashboard is the present because it tells us where we are, and then the windshield and the road ahead represents the future.
I love that. You're listening to Todd Cherches. He's the author of Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and Life. He's also a TEDx speaker, executive coach, CEO of BigBlueGumball. So Todd, what's the one question nobody ever asked you that you would love to answer?
Oh, that's a great question. In fact, that's an interesting question. I mean, people often ask, like, why visuals? Like, why did you latch on to this as your thing, right? So that's something that people kind of tiptoe around, but no, people tend to not really ask that. And growing up as a kid, I'm on the Gen X baby boomer cusp. So I grew up as a TV, watching TV. So in my TED Talk, I talk about it. When I was a kid, people would say, Todd, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be Superman. And they'd say, well, what if you can't be Superman? You need a backup plan in case that doesn't work out. And I said, all right, Batman. So so in my 5-year-old mind, those were two of my top career options. But then I realized that those jobs were only fictional. But then I said, all right, I'm going to try to get a job in the TV industry. So when I was like around 12, I realized that Superman and Batman were not realistic, but everything I did was geared towards working in the TV industry. So I was obsessed with TV Guide and programming shows and all that kind of stuff. So my first job out of college was in advertising, and then I ended up packing up at age 24 and moving out to LA and getting jobs I worked for Aaron Spelling for a while, putting scripts together. I was in casting at Columbia Pictures. I was in comedy at Disney, and I was in drama program development at CBS before I left television and got into the theme park business, where I managed that project in China that I talked about before. So, but what's interesting is the Superman Batman thing. Someone said to me, because when I told that story, they said, well, you don't have X-ray vision like Superman, but you have the power of visual thinking. So that's my equivalent. And Batman had his utility belt. And they said, you have your coaching toolkit with all your visual thinking tools, tips, and techniques. So that's my equivalent of my Batman utility belt. So in some ways, I still have that, Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne thing happening, but my alter ego is that Superman, Batman combination, but applying it in a visual and an executive coaching and a teaching context these days.
Mine was Spider-Man, then Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Speaking of Spider-Man, one of the quotes I use is, with great power comes great responsibility, right? That's in the movie Spider-Man, but in the original Spider-Man comic from 1962, that's the very last panel. He's walking down the street and it shows that. So, Spider-Man, and that's the thing, when you think about superheroes, whether it's Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, what are they? They're visual icons that represent certain character traits, right? So Superman, truth, justice, in the American way, and Batman was the one who was, avenging the death of his parents that haunted him from his childhood, and Spider-Man, again, avenging the death of his uncle Ben, right? So when you think about it, think about what your superpowers are, right? If you're a superhero in your business and you had a cape, what would be on the cape? What are the powers that you bring to the table? And I love that metaphor, because what do superheroes do? They save people, right? They make the world a better place. So in that way, in what ways in your work are you a superhero to other people, to your customers and clients? How are you saving the day? How are you, but we also have just as Superman has his kryptonite, we all have our Achilles heels, to mix metaphors, right? So what are your weaknesses? What are the things that maybe you're not that great at, or is a weak spot that maybe you need to improve on, or maybe you partner with someone else who can make up for your deficiencies, right? So that's another way to think about it, because we can't be great, or even Superman or Batman. Everyone had their arch nemesis, or they have their weak spots. That's something we need to think about for our businesses is what can we do? Who can we partner with to help save the day for our customers?
Yeah, I love that. And as as a marketer, you need to be thinking, what is the nemesis of the folks that you're wanting to help? Because that reveals an internal struggle that they have an insecurity about. And if you can convey in a beautiful way, succinctly, that you understand them and that they're safe with you, then immediately they bond with you. And that's the beauty and the power of what you're teaching folks.
Yeah, it's what are their pain points and how can you make things better for them? So that's exactly right. And we need to do that through listening, right? So this is one of my concepts that we haven't talked about yet. On the cover of my book, Visual Leadership, it's a rainbow colored eye, right? The rainbow represents two things, innovation and diversity, right? The fact that no one in the world has this rainbow eye, no one in the world sees the world exactly the way you do. So we need to remember that we're seeing it through our own lens based on our background, upbringing, culture, life experiences. Another concept, and also the rainbow represents innovation and creativity, because we need to be innovative and creative and colorful in how we come up with solutions for each client. The other concept we haven't talked about yet is what I call flipping the eye, and that was my second article in Inc. magazine that just came out the other day. Flipping the eye is two ways. One, it's turning that eye around, looking inwardly at yourself, but the other is flipping it around and looking at the world through the lens of other people who are different from you, including our customers, right? We could come out and just throw solutions against the wall, but if we don't listen to our customers, if we don't see the world through their lens, then we're just throwing up stuff out there and hoping it sticks. We need to really put ourselves, again, mixing metaphors, put ourselves in the shoes of our customers and view the world through the lens of our customers to help see the world and see their pain from their perspective, and then together we can partner with them and come up with solutions. So what are your thoughts there in terms of that flipping the eye concept, to see the world through the eyes of your customer?
No, I love it, because I always say that, our challenge as business leaders is that we need to figure out how to excel in a unique environment that's new, and that's the virtual environment, the digital environment. And the way that you do it is by being more human and less robotic or digital or analogical, right? And so what you're talking about is the secret. Here's what's crazy: being human is a competitive advantage in the virtual world. And that's what you're talking about, is by looking in and also understanding them. And if you can just immediately communicate, I get you and I understand you, and I'm going to help you resolve the issue that you're researching to resolve. Exactly. And we're going to do this together, but I'm going to support you. That's a competitive advantage, and that's being human. Everybody gets tripped up on the technology, and we can put in the keywords. We're going to do this robotic stuff and chatbots and all these things, and they miss the whole point. There's a human with a name and a family and hopes and dreams that are evaluating your solution as a potential answer to what they need.
Exactly right. Yeah, empathy, compassion, human skills, basic fundamental people skills is so key. We call them soft skills because lack of a better word. So the hard skills are like the technology and the nuts and bolts of the business. The soft skills are the people skills. But as we all know, that emotional intelligence and the soft skills is often, as like you said, a competitive advantage and can make or break a relationship. Another question that I often talk about is like not only who is your customer, but who is your customer's customer, right? Who are they serving? So we need to not only see the world through the lens of our customer, but through the lens of our customer's customer, right? So if you're working with, let's say, a sneaker company or an athletic
Mhm.
wear company, yes, you want to see the world through their lens, but who are they selling to, right? Who are the
Right.
kids or the sports teams or the parents that they're selling to? So it's not just, so it's almost like two eyes, right? One eye is for the customer and one is for the customer's customer, because you want to see things from their lens as well as from the lens of basically the end user, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of times we just stop at the customer and we don't take it that extra step, which is crucially important. So if we want to, because that's who our customers are thinking about, right? They're thinking about their customers just as we're thinking about our customers. So it's taking that extra step. A lot of times we lose sight of that, like you said, because we're so focused on the coding and the look and feel of and the functionality, and we
Mhm.
forget that there's a real human that's going to be looking at it. And that's another thing too. I use a lot of metaphors. I'm a big baseball fan, Yankees and Mets mainly. One of the thing, two concepts. One is you could dislike someone because they root for another team, or you can like them because they are also fans of the same sport, right? So a lot of times we're very competitive with people, but a lot of times we can collaborate with our competitors to benefit our customers. But one of the concepts to think about is when we're using metaphors and analogies. A lot of my students, for example, are international students, many of them from China, right? So
Mhm.
if I use a baseball analogy with a 25-year-old female from Beijing, that is not going to resonate, right? So we need to think about the stories we tell, the examples we use, and the metaphors we choose need to resonate with our audience. So what might resonate? Something like maybe dance or theater or a sport
And
that they play, right? So if I'm talking to someone
NBA.
from
Yeah.
Australia, I may talk about rugby. If I'm talking to someone from India, I may reference cricket,
Mhm.
or England, football/soccer, right? Although they get upset if you call it soccer, they want you to call it football. I learned that the hard way through talking to a friend on another podcast. But that's the thing too. It's like we're always speaking in terms of our interests and our knowledge, but we need to think about from a customer's point of view, what do they know? What do they care about? Because then you really connect with them, right? So that's another thing to think about. So using metaphors from, say, nature is universal, right? So if I say, let's plant the seed for an idea, let's go out on a limb, let's get to the root of the problem, let's see what bears fruit, and there's no telling if this grows, the sky's the limit. I just use 5 tree related nature metaphors that anyone can relate to regardless of where in the world you live. So again, you want to be speaking the language of your customer so your message resonates with them.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things I use as an example is marketing's broken because the people that are writing the copy for the product or whatever have in mind basically like that Dillard's mannequin that it's a nameless, faceless. You can hang men's clothes on it or females' clothes on it, but you're missing the point there. It's a human there, and that's why marketing is broken.
Good point. Definitely.
So Todd, how do people reach out to you? What obviously they can get your book everywhere. It's on
Yes.
Amazon, Kindle, Audible. How can they reach out? What's the best way to connect with you, hire you, engage
Sure.
with
Thank you. The two best ways, just go to my website, toddcherches.com, and you could sign up for my mailing list if you'd like and download for free my list of the top 52 books that will help make you a better visual leader. And the other way is just through LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. So connect with me, like, comment, and share on my posts. I'm happy to do the same for you. And that's a great way to learn about each other and build a relationship.
So that's Todd Cherches. You spell Churches Cherches.
Correct.
All right, Todd, you've been an awesome guest on the ROI Online Podcast.
Thank you, Steve. You've been an awesome host. This was, like you said, it's a great conversation between friends, talking business and other things, and it's great. So
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Thank you for being such a great value to my listeners.
Appreciate it.
And that's a wrap.